As she crosses the Piazza Verdi in Palermo, her heels clicking faintly on the cobblestones, Villanelle glances up at the imposing frontage of Sicily's, and indeed Italy's largest opera house. Palm trees rise from the piazza, their leaves whispering faintly in the warm breeze. Bronze lions flank the broad entrance stairway. Villanelle is wearing a silk Valentino dress and elbow-length Fratelli Orsini opera gloves. The dress is red, but so darkly shaded as to be almost black. A spacious Fendi shoulder bag hangs by a slim chain. Villanelle's face is pale in the evening light, and her hair is pinned up with a long curved clip. She looks glamorous, if less showy than the socialities in Versace and Dolce & Gabbana thronging the mirrored entrance hall. First nights at the Teatro Massimo are always on occasion, and tonight's offering is Puccini's Tosca, one of the most popular operas of all. That the title role is being sung by a local soprano, Franca Farfaglia, makes the occasion unmissable. Villanelle buys a program and moves through the entrance hall to the vestibule. The place is filling fast. There's a buzz of conversation, the muted clink of glasses, and an aroma of expensive scent. Ornate wall lights paint the marble decorations with a soft lemon glow. At the bar, she orders a mineral water and notices that she's being watched by a lean, dark-haired figure.
Can I get you something more interesting?
He asks, and she pays for the drink.
A glass of champagne, perhaps?
She smiles. He's 35, she guesses, give or take a year or two. Certain on good looks. His silver-grey shirt is impeccable, and his lightweight blazer looks like Brioni. But his Italian has the rasp of Sicily, and there's an edge of threat in his gaze. I won't, she says. Thank you.
Let me guess, you're obviously not Italian, even though you speak the language. French?
Sort of. It's complicated.
So, do you like Puccini operas?
Of course, she murmurs, although La Bohème is my favorite.
That's because you're French.
He holds out his hand.
Leoluca Messina.
Sylvain Morel.
So, what brings you to Palermo, Mademoiselle Morel?
She's tempted to terminate the conversation, to walk away, but he might follow, which would make things worse. I'm staying with friends.
Who?
No one you'd know, I'm afraid.
You'd be surprised who I know. And trust me, everyone here knows me.
Half turning, Villanelle allows a sudden smile to light her face. She waves towards the entrance. Will you excuse me, Signor Messina? My friends are here. That was less than convincing, she reproves herself, as she edges through the crowd. But there's something about Leoluca Messina, some long acquaintanceship with violence, that makes her want him to forget her face. Will Greco come? Villanelle wonders, moving through the crowd with vague purpose, scanning the faces around her as she goes. According to Konstantin's local contact, who has had several of the front houses staff discreetly bribed and questioned, the mafia boss comes to most of the important first nights. He always arrives at the last moment and takes the same box, which he occupies alone, with bodyguards stationed outside. Whether he is actually booked to come tonight has, frustratingly, been impossible to establish, but his protégé, Farfaglia, is singing the lead soprano role. The odds are good. At considerable cost, Konstantin's people have secured the neighboring box to the one Greco favors. It's on the first tier, almost directly adjacent to the stage. With 10 minutes to curtain up, and with the box on her left as yet unoccupied, Villanelle enters the nest of red plush. The box is at once public and private. At the front, perched on one of the gilt chairs with a scarlet upholstered rail at chest level, Villanelle can see and be seen by everyone in the auditorium. If she leans forward past the partition, she can look into the front of the boxes on either side of her. With the house lights extinguished, however, each box will become a secret world, its interior invisible. In the gloom of that unseen secret world, she slips her bag from her shoulder and takes out a lightweight Raja automatic pistol with an integrated Gemtech suppressor and inserts a clip of 22 mm low velocity rounds. Returning the weapon to the bag, she places it on the floor at the base of the partition, separating her from the box to her left. In the 9 months following her rebirth as Villanelle, she killed 2 men. Each project was initiated by one word text from Konstantin, followed by the transmission of detailed background documents, film clips, biographies, surveillance reports, schedules from sources unknown to her. Each planning period lasted about 4 weeks, in the course of which she was armed, informed of any logistical support she might expect, and provided with an appropriate identity. The first target, Yorgos Vlachos, had been buying radioactive cobalt-60 in Eastern Europe with a probable view to detonating a dirty bomb in Athens. She had put an SP-5 round through his chest as he changed cars in the port of Piraeus. The shot, taken with a Russian VSS at a range of 325 meters, had involved an all-night lie-up under a tarpaulin on the warehouse roof. Later, relieving the event in safety of a hotel room, Villanelle felt an intense, heart-pounding exhilaration. The dry snap of the suppressed report, the distant smack of the impact, the collapsing figure in the scope. The second target was Dragan Horvat, a Balkan politician who ran a human trafficking network. His mistake had been to take his work home with him, in the form of a pretty, heroin-addicted 17-year-old from Algeria. Unaccountably, he had fallen in love with her and taken to flying her on an expensive shopping sprees in European capital cities. London was the couple's favorite weekend destination, and when Villanelle bumped into him on a Bayswater side street late one evening, Howard smiled indulgently. He didn't immediately feel the stab wound to the inner thigh that severed his femoral artery, and as he bled to death on the pavement, his Algerian girlfriend watched him with its spaced-out eyes, absently twisting the gold bracelet that he'd bought her that afternoon in Knightsbridge. In between kills, Villanelle lived in the Paris apartment. She explored the city, sampled the pleasures it had to offer, and enjoyed a succession of lovers. These affairs always took the same course: a heady pursuit, a devouring couple of days and nights, the abrupt termination of all contact. She simply vanished from their lives, as swiftly and as mystifying as she had entered them. She ran in the Bois de Boulogne every morning, attended a jiu-jitsu dojo in Montparnasse, and practiced her marksmanship at an elite shooting club in Saint-Cloud. Meanwhile, unseen hands paid her rent and managed her trading activities, whose proceeds were paid into a current account of the Société Générale.
"Spend what you like,"
Konstantin told her,
"but stay under the radar. Live comfortably, but not excessively. Don't leave a trail."
And she didn't. She made no surface ripple, became part of that monochrome army of professionals who hurried from the place to place, the solitude stamped into the gazes. What authority imposed the sentences of death that she executed, she didn't know. She didn't ask Konstantin because she was certain that he wouldn't tell her, and in truth she didn't really care. What mattered to Villanelle was that she had been chosen as the instrument of an all-powerful organization, which had understood, just as she herself had always understood, that she was different. They had recognized her talent, sought her out, and taken her from the lowest place in the world to the highest, where she belonged. A predator, an instrument of evolution, one of that elite to whom no moral law applied. Inside her, this knowledge bloomed like a great, dark rose, filling every cavity of her being. Slowly, the auditorium of the Teatro Massimo begins to fill. Sitting back in her seat, Villanelle studies the program, her face shadowed by the partition between her box and the next. The performance time arrives, and the house lights dim, the audience hubbub fading to silence. As the conductor takes his bow to warm applause, Villanelle hears a figure quietly take his place in the adjoining box. She doesn't turn, and as the curtain rises on the first act, leans forward to gaze with rapt attention at the stage. Minute succeeds minute. Time is slowed to a crawl. Puccini's music engulfs Villanelle, but doesn't touch her. Her consciousness is focused in its entirety on the unseen person to her left. She forces herself not to look, but senses his presence like a pulse, malign and infinitely dangerous. At moments she feels a coldness at the nape of her neck and knows that he's watching her. Finally, the strains of the Te Deum die away, the first act ends and the crimson and gold curtains fall. As the house lights come up for the interval, and conversation swells in the auditorium, Villanelle sits motionless, as if hypnotized by the opera. Then, without a sideways glance, she stands and leaves the box, noting with her peripheral vision the presence of 2 bodyguards who were lounging, bored but watchful, at the end of the corridor. Moving unhurriedly into the vestibule, she makes her way to the bar and orders a glass of mineral water, which she holds but doesn't drink. At the far end of the room, she sees Leoluca Messina moving towards her. Pretending she hasn't seen him, she turns into the crowd, re-emerging near the entrance for the foyer. Outside, on the Opera House steps, the heat of the day has not yet abated. The sky is rose-pink over the sea, a livid purple overhead. Half a dozen young men passing Villanelle whistle and make appreciative comments in the local dialect. She returns and takes her place in her box moments before the curtain rises on the second act. Once again she makes a point of not glancing to her left at Greco. Instead, she gazes fixedly at the stage as the opera unfolds. The story is a dramatic one. Tosca, a singer, is in love with the painter Cavadarossi, who has been falsely accused of aiding the escape of a political prisoner. Arrested by Scarpia, the chief of police, Cavadarossi is condemned to die. Scarpia, however, proposes a deal. If Tosca gives herself to him, Cavadarossi will be released. Tosca agrees, but when Scarpia approaches her, she seizes a knife and kills him. The curtain falls, and this time, when Villanelle has finished applauding, she turns to Greco and smiles, as if seeing him for the first time. It is not long before there is a knock at the door of the box. It's one of the bodyguards, a heavy-set man who inquires, not discourteously, if he would care to join Don Salvatore for a glass of wine. Villanelle hesitates for a moment, then politely nods her acceptance. As she steps into the corridor, the second bodyguard looks her up and down. She has left her bag in the box, her hands are empty, and the Valentino dress clings to her lean, athletic form. The 2 men glance knowingly at each other. It's clear that they have delivered many women to their boss. The heavy-set man gestures to the door of Greco's box. Per favor, signorina. He stands as she enters, a man of medium height in an expensively cut linen suit, a lethal stillness about him and a smile that doesn't begin to reach his eyes. "Excuse my presumption," he says, "but I couldn't help observing your appreciation of the performance. As a fellow opera lover, I was wondering if I might offer you a glass of frappato. It comes from one of my wine guards, so I can vouch for its quality." She thanks him, takes an exploratory sip of the cold wine, introduces herself as Sylvian Morel. "And I am Salvatore Greco." There's a questioning note in his voice, but her gaze doesn't flicker. It's clear to him that she has no idea who he is. She compliments him on the wine and tells him that it's her first visit to the Teatro Massimo. "So, what do you think of Athalia?" "Superb! A fine actress and a great soprano." "I'm glad you like her. I was fortunate enough to assist in a small way with her training." "How wonderful to see your belief in her confirmed." "Il bacio di Tosca." "Excuse me?" "Questo è il bacio di Tosca." This is Tosca's kiss. Her words when she stabs Scarpia. "Of course, I'm sorry, my Italian—" "Is most accomplished, Signora Morel." Again, that icy half-smile. She inclines her head in denial. "I don't think so, Signor Greco." Part of her is conducting the conversation. Part of her is calculating ways and means, timing evasion routes, exfiltration. She's face to face with her target, but she's alone, and this, as Konstantin has so often made clear, is how it will always be. No one else can be involved except in the most peripheral, disconnected way. There can be no backup, no stage diversion, no official help. If she's taken, it's the end. There will be no discreet official leading her from the cell, no waiting vehicle to speed her to the airport. They talk, for Villanelle, language is fluid. Most of the time she thinks in French, but every so often she awakes and knows that she'd been dreaming in Russian. At times, close to sleep, the blood roars in her eyes, an unstoppable tide shot through with polyglot screams. On such occasions, alone in the Paris apartment, she anesthetizes herself with hours of web surfing, usually in English. And now, she notes, she's mentally playing out scenarios in Sicilian-inflected Italian. She hasn't sought out the language, but her head echoes with it. Is there still any part of her that is still Oksana Vorontsova? Does she still exist, that little girl who lay night after night in urine-sodden sheets at the orphanage, planning her revenge? Or was there only ever Villanelle, evolution's chosen instrument? Greco wants her, she can tell, and the more she plays the well-born, impressionable young Parisienne with a wide-eyed gaze, the greater his desire grows. He's like a crocodile watching from the shallows as a gazelle inches closer to the water's edge. How does it usually play out, she wonders. Dinner somewhere they know him well, with the waiter's deferential and the bodyguards lounging at the neighboring table, followed by a chauffeur drive to some discreet old town apartment?
Every night, this box is reserved for me, he tells her. The Gracchi were aristocrats in Palermo before the time of the Habsburgs.
In that case, I consider myself fortunate to be here.
Will you stay for the final act?
With pleasure, she murmurs, as the orchestra strikes up. As the opera continues, Villanelle once again gazes raptly at the stage, waiting for her moment that she has planned. This comes with great love duets, Amaro sol per te. As the final note dies away, the audience roars in applause, with cries of "Bravi!" and "Brava Franca!" echoing from every corner of the house. Villanelle applauds with the others, and eyes shining, turns to Greco. His eyes meet hers, and as if on impulse, he seizes her hand and kisses it. She holds his gaze for a moment, and raising her other hand to her hair, unfastens the long curved clip so that the dark tresses fall to her shoulders. And then her arm descends, a pale blur, and her clip is buried deep in his left eye. His face blanks with shock and pain. Villanelle presses the tiny plunger, injecting a lethal dose of veterinary strength entafine into the frontal lobe of his brain and inducing immediate paralysis. She lowers him to the floor and glances around. Her own box is empty, and in the box beyond, an elderly couple are dimly visible, peering at the stage through opera glasses. All eyes are on Farfalla and the tenor singing Cavaradossi, both standing motionless as wave after wave of applause breaks over them. Reaching over the partition, Villanelle recovers her bag, retires into the shadows, and takes out the Raja. The double snap of the suppressed weapon is unremarkable, and the low velocity, 22 rounds leave barely a loose thread as they punch through Greco's linen jacket. The applause is subsiding as Villanelle opens the door of the box, her weapon concealed behind her back, and beckons concernedly to the bodyguards, who enter and genuflect beside their employer. She fires twice, less than a second separating the silenced shots, and both men drop to the carpeted floor. Blood jets briefly from the entry wounds in the back of their necks, but the men are already dead, their brainstems shot through. For several long seconds, Villanelle is overwhelmed with the intensity of the killings, and by a satisfaction so piercing that it's close to pain. It's the feeling that sex always promises but never quite delivers, and for a moment she clutches herself, gasping through the Valentino dress. Then, slipping the Raja into her back and squaring her shoulders, she exits the box.
"Don't tell me you're leaving, Signora Morel."
Her heart slams in her chest. Walking towards her down the narrow corridor with the sinister grace of a panther is Leoluca Messina. "Unfortunately, yes."
"That's too bad. But how did you know my uncle?"
She stares at him.
"Don Salvatore. You've just come out of his box."
"We met earlier, and now, if you'll excuse me, Signor Messina." He looks at Villanelle for a moment, then steps firmly past her and opens the door of Greco's box. When he comes out a moment later, he's carrying a gun. A Beretta Storm 9mm part of her registers as she levels the Raja at his head. For a moment they stand there unmoving. Then he nods, his eyes narrowing, and lowers the Beretta.
"Put that away," he orders.
She doesn't move, aligns the fiber-optic foresight with the base of his nose, prepares to sever a third Sicilian brainstem.
"Look, I'm glad the bastard's dead, okay? And any minute now, the curtain's going to come down and this whole place is going to be crowded with people. If you want to get out of here, put that gun away and follow me." Some instinct tells her to obey. They hurry through the doors at the end of the corridor, down a short flight of stairs, and into a crimson upholstered passageway encircling the stalls. "Take my hand," he orders, and Villanelle does so. Coming towards them is a uniformed usher. Messina greets him cheerily, and the usher grins. "Making a quick getaway, senor?" "Something like that." At the end of the passageway, directly below Greco's box, is a door, faced in the same crimson brocade as the walls. Opening it, Messina pulls Villanelle into a small vestibule. He pots a blanket-like curtain, and suddenly they're backstage, in a heavy half-dark of the wings, with the music relayed by tannoy from the orchestra pit blaring about them. Men and women in 19th century costumes swim out of the shadows. Stagehands move with regimented purpose. Placing an arm around Villanelle's shoulder, Messina hurries her past racks of costumes and table sets with props, then directs her into the narrow space between the cyclorama and the brick-back wall. As they cross the stage, they hear a volley of musket fire. Cavaradossi's execution. Then, more corridors, discolored walls hung with fire extinguishers, and instructions for emergency evacuation of the house, and finally they're stepping into the stage door onto the Piazza Wodi, with the sound of traffic in their ears and the livid purple sky overhead. 50 meters away, a silver and black MV Augusta motorcycle is standing at a bollard on the Via Volturno. Villanelle climbs up behind Messina, and with a low growl of exhaust, they glide into the night. It's several minutes before they hear the first police sirens. Leoluca is heading eastwards, winding through side streets, the MV Augusta nervously responsive to the sharp twists and turns. At intervals to her left, Villanelle catches a glimpse of the lights of the port and the inky shimmer of the sea. People glance at them as they pass. The men with the wolfish features, the women in the scarlet dress. But this is Palermo. No one looks too closely. The streets narrow, with washing suspended above, and the sounds and smells of family meals issuing through open windows. And then a dark square, a derelict cinema, and the baroque facade of a church. Rocking the bike onto its stand, Messina leads her down an alley beside the church and unlocks a gate. They are in a walled cemetery, a city of the dead, with family tombs and mausoleums extending in dim rows into the night. "This is where they'll bury Salvatore when they've dug your bullets out of him," says Messina. "And sooner or later they'll bury me." "You said you were happy to see him dead." "You've saved me the trouble of killing him myself. He was an animale, out of control." "You'll take his place." Messina shrugs. "Someone will. Business as usual." "Something like that. But you, who do you work for?" "Does it matter?" "It matters if you're going to come after me next." He draws the squat little Beretta from his shoulder holster. "Perhaps I should kill you now." "You're welcome to try," she says, drawing the Roger. They stare at each other for a moment. Then, without lowering the weapon, she steps forward him and reaches for his belt. "Truce." The sex is brief and savage. She holds the Roger throughout. Afterwards, placing her gun hand on the shoulder for balance, she wipes herself with the tail of his shirt. "And now," he says, watching her with odd repulsion, and noting how, in the half-light, the asymmetrical tilt of her upper lip makes her look not sensual, as he'd previously imagined, but coldly rapacious. "Now you go." "Will I see you again?" "Pray that you don't." He glances at her for a moment and walks away. The MV Augusta kicks into life with a snarl and fades into the night. Picking her way downhill, between the tombs, Villanelle finds a small clearing in front of a pillared mausoleum. From the fanny shoulder bag, she takes a briquette lighter, a crumpled blue cotton frock, a pair of wafer-thin sandals, and a lingerie fabric money belt. The money belt holds 500 euros in cash, an airline ticket, and a passport and credit card identifying her as Irina Skoryok, a French national born in Ukraine. Quickly changing her clothes, Villanelle makes a pyre of the Valentino dress, all documents relating to Sylvain Morel, and the green contact lenses and brunette wig that she's been wearing. The fire burns briefly but intensely, and when there is nothing left, she sweeps the ashes into the undergrowth with a cypress branch. Continuing downhill, Villanelle finds a rusty exit gate and a path leading down steps to a narrow lane. This gives onto a broader, busier road, which she follows westwards towards the city centre. After 20 minutes, she finds what she's been looking for: a large wheeled garbage bin between a restaurant, overflowing with kitchen waste. Pulling on the opera gloves, she looks around her and makes sure that she is unobserved. Then she plunges both hands into the bin and pulls out half a dozen bags. Unknotting one, she thrusts the Fendi shoulder bag and the Raja into the stinking mess of clamshells, fish heads, and coffee grounds. Returning the bag to the bin, she piles the others on the top. Last to disappear are the gloves. The whole operation has taken less than 30 seconds. Unhurriedly, she continues walking westwards. At 11 a.m. the following morning, Agent Paolo Vella of the Polizia di Stato is standing at the bar of a cafe in the Piazza Olivella, taking coffee with a colleague. It has been a long morning. Since dawn, Vella has been manning the cordon at the main entrance to the Teatro Massimo, now a crime scene. The crowds, by large, have been respectful, keeping their distance. Nothing has been officially announced, but all Palermo seems to know that Don Salvatore Greco has been assassinated. Theories abound, but the general assumption is that this is family business. There's a rumor that the hit was carried out by a woman, but there are always rumors. "Will you look at that?" breathes Vella, as thoughts of the Greco murder temporarily banished. His colleague follows his gaze out of the cafe into the busy street, where a young woman in a blue sundress, a tourist evidently, has paused to watch the sudden ascent of a flight of pigeons. Her lips are parted, her grey eyes shine, the morning light illuminated her close-cropped hair. "Madonna or war?" asks Vella's colleague. "Madonna, without question." "In that case, Paolo, too good for you." He smiles. For a moment in the Sunday street, time stands still. Then, as the pigeons circle the square, the young woman continues on her way, long limbs swimming, and is lost in the throng.